Firstly, how do you define the importance of Murban crude oil for the UAE?
I think launching the Murban crude as a benchmark is part of the UAE's sort of policy of becoming a bit more international in its oil policy, in its approach. The reorganization of ADNOC, the fact that east of Suez has become a more important growth market for crude oil, and I think they want more control over pricing as opposed to relying on pricing on external factors over which they have no control. So Murban is about, at the moment, just under half of their production. And I think this doesn't really have a direct bearing on the, on what's happened at the OPEC Plus. I think there are other factors, but it is obviously one of the factors that has influenced the UAE's request for a higher baseline. I think it's early to tell because they need more liquidity. They need more sellers to price against Murban, but the benchmark itself has a lot of support from international trading houses, oil companies, the clearing. So I think there is a lot of support for it. It's just a question of liquidity. And I think that is one of the reasons why they want to maximize their production, because if you don't have liquidity in a benchmark, it won't succeed. And I think the hope was that at some point in the future, Aramco might even price against Murban. That hasn't happened, may not happen unless they resolve this big dispute. One of the other factors is they are trying to give some guidance as to what Murban supply will be, how much they will deliver into the contract. So I think they've given guidance for beyond July this year, which is when the last of the cuts, the tapering of the cuts was supposed to end. Now, the UAE was not opposed to increasing production between August and December. We don't oppose increasing production, but if we are going to freeze the cuts until the end of next year, 2022, then we want a revision of the baseline, which is in a way reasonable because their capacity has expanded. And I think they want to maximize their production. They want to get the maximum. They want to be in control of pricing because ultimately Murban is going to be used to price their other crude grades. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that they will produce more, they can deliver more. So I don't think that's a direct challenge to the OPEC agreement. They're also trying to run less Murban in their refinery. It is a serious dispute, which will need some mediation because they're not talking to each other at the moment. On the ICE, the Intercontinental Exchange, which is also, where Brent is traded, I think it's more that it's being seen more as a benchmark for the Asian market. And of course, when you have a traded oil on an exchange, there's always arbitrage opportunities. I mean, there was even talk that I think they were talking to the Americans for US crude being shipped to Asia to be priced off Murban. So it hasn't happened yet, but it's being negotiated. And as I said, Murban may not have the liquidity at the moment, but it does have a lot of support from the international trading companies, and they won't want it to fail. I mean, I remember when Dubai was launched, the Dubai Mercantile Exchange, it took a long time for it to, become a liquid benchmark. It's obvious that it will have a very significant part in the future. It will be it won't be the percentage of its contribution to GDP will probably shrink a little bit, but it's not the same across the oil producing states in the Gulf. Iraq remains highly dependent on hydrocarbons. And it's going to take them a long time to develop their renewables. They are moving ahead now, whereas there is movement in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, not so much in Kuwait. So I think it's an uneven move. So some countries will be more able to deal with the transition. I think the challenge now is not to move away completely from hydrocarbons, because we're still going to need them, and they are low cost, so they will have a role. It's to decarbonize. It's to use technology to remove the carbon dioxide from your hydrocarbon production, so find some way of making it acceptable to consumers as regulations are being tightened against methane emissions, CO2 content. So I think that's where the challenge is.